There's a particular kind of man who operates like a city with rolling blackouts. One moment the skyline is brilliantly lit, vibrant and drawing you in, and the next, everything goes dark without warning, leaving you in a disorienting silence. I just met one. His name was Julian, and he was the most compelling and confounding man I had ever known. Our initial interactions were a masterclass in charm, a dazzling display of wit, intelligence, and a focused attention that made me feel like the only person in the universe. But what he didn't know, what men like him never seemed to account for, is that I had spent years of my life becoming an expert in emotional architecture. My day job was in urban planning, designing systems for cities to function, but my life's work had been mapping my own interior world, reinforcing my foundations and installing my own power grid. I desired peace, a quiet and stable sense of self that I had fought tooth and nail to build, and I was not about to let anyone, no matter how captivating, plunge me into darkness. The first blackout came after a week of incandescent connection. Texts, long phone calls, a dinner that felt less like a date and more like a reunion of souls. Then, nothing. A complete and total cessation of energy. The injustice wasn't the silence itself. It was the calculated whiplash of it, designed to create a void that I was supposed to feel an overwhelming urge to fill. It was a power play as old as time, a test to see if I would panic and start anxiously flipping switches, sending frantic texts, questioning my own worth. What Julian didn't understand was that he wasn't facing a woman who needed his light to see. He was facing a woman who had learned to generate her own. This wasn't going to be a story of a heartbroken girl chasing a man who ran hot and cold. This was going to be the story of how a woman with unshakable self-respect becomes a mirror, and how a man who has spent his life running from his own reflection is finally forced to stand still and look. Have you ever felt that dizzying drop when someone's energy suddenly vanishes? It's a specific kind of psychological warfare, and I promise you, watching how it fails against a fortified mind is a deeply satisfying story. The blackout lasted exactly 6 days. On the 7th, my phone lit up with his name as I knew it would. There was no apology, no explanation, just a breezy, "Thinking of you. How has your week been?" As if he'd simply been busy, as if the sudden chasm of silence had been a figment of my imagination. This wasn't just neglect. This was a strategic maneuver, the second move in a well-rehearsed game. The arrogant assumption underpinning it was that I would be so relieved to hear from him that I would swallow my confusion and ask for nothing. An older version of me would have. She would have replied instantly, masking her hurt with false brightness, desperate to restore the connection. But that version of me was long gone, buried under layers of hard-won wisdom. My goal wasn't to punish him, but to refuse to participate in the dynamic. I waited a few hours, not as a tactic, but because I was genuinely busy living the life that he had temporarily vacated. When I did reply, I was pleasant but direct. "It was a good week, thanks. I have to admit, I was surprised not to hear from you." This was my attempt at a reasonable resolution. I was offering a clean, adult path to communication. I wasn't accusing. I was stating a simple fact. His response was a masterpiece of deflection. "Yeah, work just swallowed me whole. It's a beast. You know how it is." He was using his career as a shield, a noble excuse that I was supposed to accept without question. To question it would be to seem needy or demanding. This was the trap. He was escalating by doubling down on his own impenetrability. He was making his unavailability my problem to manage. Any further probing from my end would allow him to frame me as the unreasonable one. He believed he was untouchable, that his charm was a universal key that could unlock any door and absolve any transgression. He was wrong. The conversation was a dead end, and I let it die. I didn't push. I didn't demand more. I simply observed. This was the moment his strategy backfired. In refusing my calm, direct bid for clarity, he hadn't asserted his power. He had revealed his hand. He had shown me that he was incapable of or unwilling to engage in basic, healthy communication. He wasn't a busy, high-powered man. He was a guarded, emotionally stunted one. The game he was playing wasn't about winning my affection. It was about maintaining his own emotional distance at all costs. The interaction was a crucial data point. My frustration, that initial sting of being dismissed, began to morph into something else. A cool, dispassionate curiosity. I shifted my focus from the emotional impact on me to a clinical observation of him. This was my investigation phase. I stopped asking, why is he doing this to me? And started asking, what is the function of this behavior for him? I began to see him not as an antagonist in my story, but as the protagonist of his own tragedy, a man caught in a loop he didn't know how to break. I paid attention to the little things, the way he'd speak of his father with a mixture of reverence and resentment, the way he described past relationships as dramatic or complicated, always positioning himself as the stoic, rational man beset by overly emotional women. It was a narrative crafted to absolve himself of all responsibility. He built his identity around the idea of being the one who remains calm, the one who doesn't do drama, yet he engineered situations that were guaranteed to produce it. He created chaos and then held himself above it. My aha moment, the discovery of his core vulnerability, came during a conversation about travel. I spoke of a solo trip I'd taken to Lisbon, describing the joy of aimless wandering, of getting lost and finding my own way. His reaction was telling. A flicker of something, not admiration, but a deep, unsettled anxiety, crossed his face. I could never do that, he said a little too quickly. I need a plan, a destination, an objective. It was all there in that one statement. His entire life was a carefully curated itinerary designed to avoid the terrifying prospect of simply being. His charm, his career, his push-pull dating style. It was all a frantic, forward motion to keep him from having to sit quietly with himself. The wounded masculine archetype, as Jung would describe it, was on full display. His emotional core was a place of perceived weakness, a wound so deep he had built a fortress of control and avoidance around it. His fear wasn't of intimacy with me, it was of intimacy with himself. And my self-sufficiency, my comfort in my own solitude, my ability to thrive in the open space he so feared, was profoundly unsettling to him. It wasn't personal. It was systemic. I wasn't dealing with a malicious player. I was dealing with a wounded man terrified that my wholeness would expose his own fragmentation. And in that moment of understanding, I knew exactly what I had to do, or rather, what I had to not do. My strategy, if you could call it that, was born from this realization. It was simple, elegant, and required no complex maneuvers. It was a plan of radical non-participation. I would no longer be a variable in his emotional equation. I would become a constant. I decided, with a clarity that felt like a deep, calming breath, that I would not contort myself to fit into the narrow, unpredictable spaces he offered. I would not shrink myself to make him feel bigger. I would not quiet my own needs to soothe his unacknowledged fears. My primary ally in this was the formidable sense of self I had spent a decade building. I called up my best friend, Sarah, who had been my steadfast witness through the years of my own reconstruction. I laid out the Julian situation not as a complaint, but as a case study. He's not a bad guy, I explained, pacing my sunlit living room. He's just a man who is at war with his own interior, and he wants me to enlist in his army, to fight on the side of his defenses. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, sipped her tea over our video call. So what's the plan? Ghost him? She asked. No, I replied, feeling the strength of my conviction. That's his move. That's a reaction. My plan is to do nothing. I am going to be exactly who I am 100% of the time. When he offers connection, I'll accept it if it feels authentic. When he withdraws, I will pour that energy back into my own life. I will not chase. I will not question. I will not beg for the lights to be turned back on. I will be a mirror. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then a slow smile spread across her face. Clara, that's genius. You're going to hold up a mirror to a vampire. He won't know what to do when he sees there's no reflection of fear or anxiety staring back at him. That was it, precisely. My strategy wasn't about defeating him or winning him over. It was about honoring myself so completely that my very presence would become a passive challenge to his entire operating system. I would be relentlessly, peacefully authentic, and I would let his dysfunction crash against the shores of my self-respect until he either learned to swim or was forced to retreat. Julian, of course, was completely oblivious to this internal shift. He operated with the supreme overconfidence of a man who believes his patterns are invisible. He likely interpreted my lack of panicked response as a sign that I was losing interest, which, according to his playbook, meant it was time to escalate his efforts to pull me back in. He mistook my calm for passivity, my self-containment for weakness. He could not conceive of a reality where a woman wasn't anxiously awaiting his next move, and this miscalculation made him brazen. The next blackout was shorter, only 3 days, but it was followed by a gesture far grander than a simple text. He called me on a Friday afternoon. "I know this is last minute," he began, his voice laced with that familiar potent charm. "But my firm is having its annual gala tonight. Black tie. I have a spare ticket, and I'd love for you to be there." This was a significant escalation. It wasn't a casual drink. It was a public-facing event, an invitation into a more visible part of his world. It was designed to be a dazzling display, a powerful reminder of the bright lights he could offer. The implicit message was clear. "See what you're missing when I'm gone? See how exciting my world is? Aren't you lucky I've chosen to let you back in?" He expected me to be flustered, flattered, and overwhelmingly grateful. He expected me to drop everything to accommodate his spontaneous whim. The old me would have been a flurry of anxiety, scrambling to find a dress, giddy with the validation. But the current me simply paused, consulted my own internal state, and replied with calm honesty. "That sounds lovely, Julian. Unfortunately, I already have plans tonight. I'm hosting a dinner party for some friends." I wasn't lying. It was my monthly potluck, a sacred ritual of comfort and genuine connection. His silence on the other end of the line was more telling than any words. It was a beat of pure, unadulterated shock. He had offered me the glittering prize, and I had politely declined in favor of my own life. "Oh," he finally managed, his voice stripped of its usual confidence. "Right. Well, another time then. The interaction was a small victory, a successful test of my new strategy. I hadn't been punitive or reactive. I had simply prioritized my own plans and my own peace over his dramatic, last-minute bid for my attention. He had expected to find me waiting in the dark, and instead, he found that my house was already full of light. The execution of my plan, my strategy of radical authenticity, began in earnest. It was less a series of actions and more a state of being. The gala incident had unsettled him, and for the first time I felt a shift in the dynamic. He was the one who was off balance. A week later, he tried again, this time with more planning. He invited me to a small gathering at his apartment to meet his closest friends. This was another classic move. "Let me show you that I am capable of intimacy by introducing you to my inner circle." I accepted, because I was genuinely curious and had no other plans. The evening was a perfect microcosm of his entire being. His friends were intelligent and engaging, and his apartment was a fortress of impeccable taste. Cool grays, minimalist art, not a single object out of place. It was beautiful but sterile. It was a space designed to be admired, not lived in. Throughout the night, Julian performed his role flawlessly. He'd place a hand on the small of my back, a possessive public gesture, then drift away to another conversation, leaving me to fend for myself. He'd draw me into a deep discussion with a friend, showering me with praise. "Clara is brilliant, she designs cities," only to then make a subtle, negating joke at my expense a few minutes later. It was the constant push and pull, the giving and taking away, all acted out on a small stage. But I didn't play my part. When he drifted away, I didn't watch him from across the room with longing. I engaged deeply with his friends, finding common ground, laughing, being entirely present. When he made the little joke, I didn't bristle or get defensive. I simply met his eyes with a calm, neutral gaze that offered him no reaction to feed on. I was a mirror reflecting his own inconsistency back at him. I wasn't angry, I wasn't hurt, I was just there, whole, complete, and unaffected by his atmospheric shifts. The more I remained myself, the more agitated he became. He started refilling my wine glass too often, his movements becoming jerky and less controlled. He was working so hard to manage my perception of him, and I was doing nothing to help. The tension was building not because of a conflict between us, but because of the growing conflict within him. My refusal to be thrown off balance was throwing him off balance completely. He was pressing all the buttons, and none of the lights were turning on. The more I implemented my strategy of quiet self-possession, the more his own internal tension became visible. He was a man whose entire relational model was based on his ability to provoke a reaction, to create a dynamic of chase and retreat. My refusal to run threw his whole system into disarray. He couldn't label me as needy or dramatic, so he was left with no familiar script to follow. This is when he began to escalate his tactics, moving from subtle manipulation to more direct emotional provocations. He started to test my boundaries more explicitly, trying to find a crack in the calm facade he so clearly found unnerving. One evening, while we were having a quiet dinner, he brought up an ex-girlfriend. He painted a tragic picture of a woman he had loved deeply, but who had ultimately been too much for him. Her emotional needs a burden he couldn't carry. It was a carefully crafted story designed to elicit a specific response. He wanted me to do one of two things: either reassure him that I was different, that I was the cool girl who wouldn't ask for too much, or to feel a pang of insecurity, a fear that I too might be discarded for having needs. It was a loyalty test and a warning, all wrapped in a veil of vulnerability. This was his attempt to regain control of the narrative, to cast himself as the wounded hero and me as the potential future villain. But I didn't take the bait. I didn't reassure him or shrink myself. I simply listened with genuine empathy. "That sounds like it was a very painful experience for you both," I said, my voice soft but firm. I didn't offer analysis. I didn't offer to heal him. I simply acknowledged his stated pain. Then I gently changed the subject. My response denied him the reaction he was seeking. By offering empathy without enmeshment, I communicated a powerful boundary. Your past is your own to carry. I will not audition for a role in your unresolved drama. The air between us grew thick with what was unsaid. He looked at me, his eyes searching for the usual cues of female anxiety, and found none. I could see the frustration warring with a flicker of something else. Respect? Fear? The suspense was no longer about what he would do next, but about when the cognitive dissonance would become too much for him to bear. He was an addict, and I was refusing to be his drug. The pressure was building inside his own system, and I knew with absolute certainty that a rupture was imminent. The breaking point, the climax of our silent psychological war, arrived not with a bang, but with a quiet, desperate attempt at self-sabotage. It happened after a period of what, on the surface, looked like progress. He had been consistent for almost 2 weeks. There were no blackouts, no mixed signals, just a steady stream of warmth and attention. He was trying, in his own way, to play the part of the man he thought I wanted. We spent a weekend together that was almost idyllic, a perfect imitation of a healthy, budding relationship. He was charming, attentive, and seemingly vulnerable. But I knew it was a performance, a last-ditch effort to keep his own shadow at bay. The intimacy was becoming too real, my consistency too reliable. It was activating his deepest fears. On Sunday night, as we were sitting on his perfectly arranged sofa, he turned to me, his face a mask of feigned regret. This was it, the final, most powerful push away. "Clara," he began, his voice heavy with rehearsed solemnity, "I have to be honest. I can't give you what you want. I'm just not built for this. I'm not good at relationships. You deserve someone who is." It was the classic speech of the emotionally unavailable man, a preemptive strike designed to make him the tragic, noble figure while forcing the woman to either fight for him, "No, you are good enough," or leave wounded and rejected. He expected tears. He expected arguments. He expected me to try and convince him of his own worth, to take on the emotional labor of fixing him. He braced himself for the drama he himself was creating. This was his ultimate weapon, the performance of self-deprecation as a tool of emotional distance. He was ending things, but in a way that laid the blame on his own inherent brokenness, making it an untouchable, unfixable problem. He was offering me a noble exit from a game he was no longer able to control. He looked at me, his expression a careful mixture of sorrow and resolve, waiting for me to play my assigned part. The silence in the room was absolute. He had laid his final card on the table, confident it was the ace that would win him back his solitude. Instead of the tears or arguments he was girded for, I simply held his gaze, my own expression calm and open. I let the weight of his declaration settle in the air, refusing to rush in and dissipate its power. A small, knowing smile touched my lips, not of condescension, but of deep, resonant understanding. Then, I delivered the line that would shatter his entire defense. "I know," I said softly. His composure cracked. A flicker of sheer astonishment, of pure disbelief, broke through his carefully constructed mask. He had expected me to fight his conclusion, not validate it. I continued, my voice even and gentle, presenting the evidence I had been gathering all along. "I've known for a while, Julian, but I don't think you're being entirely honest. You say you're not good at this, but that's not the whole truth." I leaned forward slightly, not aggressively, but with an intimacy he had been trying to avoid for months. "The truth is, you're terrified. You're terrified of what it would mean to stop running. This whole performance, the push and pull, the charming apologies, even this speech right now, it's not about being bad at relationships, it's an incredibly sophisticated strategy to protect a very old, very deep wound. It's your shadow, the part of you that feels unworthy of a consistent, peaceful love." His face went pale. I had not just refused to play my part. I had named the entire play, described the set, and exposed the director. His power, which relied on the other person's ignorance of the game, evaporated in an instant. And while I have infinite compassion for that wounded part of you, I concluded, my voice full of genuine warmth but also unshakable finality, I have far too much respect for myself to live in its shadow. I'm not leaving because you're not good enough. I'm leaving because it was over. The mirror I had been holding up was no longer passive. I had angled it directly at him, and the reflection was undeniable. His shock curdled into a flash of anger, then crumbled into a look of utter, desolate exposure. The king was naked, and for the first time, someone had dared to say it out loud. The aftermath was silence. Not the calculated, weaponized silence he used to deploy, but a hollow, empty silence that he was now left to fill on his own. I stood up, gathered my things, and walked out of his beautiful, sterile apartment, leaving him sitting on the sofa amidst the ruins of his own defenses. I didn't feel the triumphant adrenaline of a battle won. I felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet vindication. My victory wasn't in breaking him. It was in refusing to let him break me. The injustice he had perpetrated wasn't grand or criminal, but it was a deeply personal one. The slow, insidious erosion of another person's reality for the sake of his own comfort. I had rectified that injustice not by seeking revenge, but by choosing radical self-preservation. In the weeks that followed, I heard nothing from him, and I expected to hear nothing. The consequences of my actions were for him to deal with alone. His long-term outcome was now in his hands. He could finally face the shadow I had illuminated, do the painful work of healing that wounded part of himself, or he could find someone new, someone who didn't come with her own power grid, and start the cycle all over again. But I knew, with certainty, that he would never be able to run the game with the same unconscious arrogance again. I had given him the terrible gift of awareness. My own life, in contrast, flourished in the newfound space. My own light burned brighter without the threat of his intermittent blackouts. I learned the most critical lesson of all. True power is not the ability to change or control another person. True power lies in the unwavering commitment to your own authenticity. It's the quiet, unshakable knowledge of your own worth that acts as a shield against the chaos of others. The moral of this story isn't about how to fix an emotionally unavailable man. It is a testament to the profound strength that comes from fixing yourself first. What part of your own life are you dimming to accommodate someone else's darkness? I encourage you to turn your own lights on, as brightly as you can. You'll be amazed at who is drawn to the warmth and who scurries away, finally exposed by a light they cannot control.